Mad Wild West podcast. Kick your boots off and stay a while, because you're about to hear the stories lost in time from the people that lived and made the Wild West mad. Okay, it's that time again. News of the day in the Mad Wild West. Let's take a look. This is from the Weekly Arizona Miner that was printed out of Prescott, Arizona, April 13th, 1872. Now, lately, there's been earthquakes happening all over kind of the Pacific Rim area. And back in the Mad Wild West days, they were not excluded from those earthquakes. So here we go. This one is titled The California Earthquake. From the Los Angeles News of March 30th and 31st, we have the particulars of the late catastrophe at Owens River, California. It would seem that 3 towns situated in the valley of Owens River were so damaged by the earthquake of the 26th as to warrant the statement of their destruction. The ill-fated towns are Swansea, Lone Pine, and Independence. The first of these is the center of a wealthy mining district, as well as the center of extensive mining operations. At this point, the shocks were so severe that the smelting works, furnaces, and buildings were all destroyed. Only one death is reported from Swansea. The town of Lone Pine was instantaneously leveled. Yeah, you heard that right. Instantaneously leveled at the first shock, no building of any description being capable of withstanding the rigor of this visitation. It is thought that this town stood immediately over the source of the disturbance. Independence is likewise said to have succumbed to the shock, but it is not stated whether destruction has been as complete as in the case of the other two. It would seem probable, however, that some of those wooden buildings may have escaped destruction, as it is especially stated that all the buildings of brick or stone were completely wrecked. The town of Cerro Gordo, situated in the Owens River region, but at the summit of a mountain range, although some of its buildings were overthrown and a great many damaged, seems to have escaped the general ruin which visited the towns of the valley. But the destruction of those towns, together with the lives of some 35 of the inhabitants and the wounding of many more, was not the only freak of this convulsion. For a distance of 30 miles along the Owens River, an immense fissure has been opened up by the upheaval, and that the telescope range of mountains has been rent in twain, so that a pass is now clearly visible from the neighboring highway. Isn't that crazy? In one earthquake, it ripped a 30-mile fissure near the river and created a new pass through the mountains. Just like everything in the Mad Wild West, so much violence, and Mother Nature was the same way. And here, from the same newspaper, is a sad one, but a short one. It's titled Dead Indians. The Eureka in Nevada Sentinel of March 13th says that smallpox is making terrible havoc among the Indians at Secret Canyon. A gentleman who had arrived from the canyon saw 17 defunct Indians scattered on the ground. This headline reads, Suicide. They have had a most unromantic suicide of a woman at Aurora, Nevada, the wife of Mr. Butler, Register of the Land Offices, where in a state of intoxication discharged one chamber of a revolver pistol at her sleeping husband. The sleeper, believing himself to be severely assassinated, got out of bed and retired to the kitchen, there to die. The neighbors came in and proved to the satisfaction of Mr. Butler that he was only badly scared, when a visit to the bedroom developed the fact that the woman had actually shot herself, inflicting a wound of which she died soon after. Another sad, sad story in the Mad Wild West. Again from the same paper, April 13th, 1872, the Weekly Arizona Miner, and it says worse than the Flying Dutchman. And here's how it reads. Well, yes, they can get up some extravagant stories about rich strikes, even in the Golden State, where extravagance is so unnecessary. Near to the town of Cerro Gordo, saith report, a man was hunting and actually stumbled across some crab pins. In the act of falling, this man struck his gun against something, and the sight was displaced, whereupon this man was hunting became wroth. Fortunately, however, before this man's misfortune had yet worked him up to the suicide point, he saw something which shone with a metallic luster. Reposing among the rocks and pulling forth his hunting knife, proceeded to prospect. From the aforesaid crepins, he soon sliced off a mass of pure silver, from which he constructed a sight for and fitted upon his gun. Now this man, who was hunting since the date of this incident, worn the covers off several small-sized Bibles, making affidavits substantially as stated, and yet has never been able to again discover the spot, which is only a few hours' ride from Cerro Gordo. The principal mystery about this matter is how it happens that the miners and others of the neighborhood have the fullest confidence in the truth of this report and are continually organized to find the treasure. And the final headline. This one states, Wickenburg and Date Creek. And if you haven't visited the YouTube channel, I do have one on Date Creek that you should check out. Just look up the Mad Wild West on YouTube and you'll be able to see Date Creek. Very interesting place that had a fort during the Indian Wars in the Arizona Territory. All right, back to the headlines. This one reads, Ben Block from the firm Barnett and Block in Wickenburg sends us the following under date of the 10th. Aridaba, the great Mojave chief, passed through here with a band of Mojaves on his way to Maricopa. Mr. Smith will leave for California to buy artesian well machinery and return as quickly as possible to bore for water near the Vulture Mine. Then it has underneath it Date Creek. Mr. Gibson, who arrived here recently, informs us that the same chief and his braves had also visited Camp Date Creek, and that they were going to visit the Pimas and Maricopas and perhaps Camp McDowell. When asked if he did not fear to travel through the Apache country, the chief said, yes, a little, but the Apaches know I and my warriors can fight! ! That's the attitude that we always see in the Mad Wild West. This episode of the Mad Wild West is brought to you by For Men Only, a positive cure for lost or failing manhood, general and nervous disability, weakness of the body and mind, effect of errors or excesses in old or young, robust, noble manhood, fully restored, how to enlarge and strengthen weak, underdeveloped organs and parts of the body, absolutely unfailing home treatment, reflects in a day. Men testify from 47 states and territories, and even foreign countries. You can write for them. The book fully explains and proves how good this product is, and it's for free. The address is Erie Medical Company, Buffalo, New York. There you go. I'm not going to read too much into that, but for men in the Mad Wild West, they had treatments to make them even more, quote, more manly. And this episode is brought to you also by Syrup of Figs. Has a picture of a nice young lady picking figs off a vine or off of a limb. And it states, a pleasing sense of health and strength renewed and of ease and comfort. Follows the use of syrup figs as it acts gently on the kidneys, liver, and bowels, effectively cleansing the system when costive or bouillons, effectively cleansing the system, dispelling colds, headaches, and fevers, and prominently curing habitual constipation without weakening or irritating the organs on which it acts. For sale in 50-cent and $1 bottles by all leading druggists. Manufactured only by the California Fig Syrup Company. Okay, I didn't know figs could do so much. I think everybody knows about one part of that, but I didn't realize it could be used for dispelling colds, headaches, and fevers. Maybe it's all natural, but I don't know. Some of these sound like they're Mad Wild West claims. Judge for yourself. Pull up your boots, reload your 6-shooters, and get your Winchester rifle ready. Because today's main story, we're going to follow a young man named John. And he was in his teens at this point. And I'm going to take some excerpts from his life that he wrote down in the 1800s of his time as a Mormon coming across and settling in the Salt Lake area. And his life is pretty amazing what he went through. And it's true adventures that really show what it was like like to live in the Mad Wild West. So here we go. He says, on reaching the valley, our people at first all lived in the old fort. Father was the first to move out. He had built a 2-room log house on the lot where Uncle Birmingham later built the Beehive and Lion houses. One of Father's trips to the canyon for wood, he took me with him. As we returned, we saw Apostle John Taylor and George Q. Cannon running a whipsaw. They gave Father a red pine slab, which he hauled home and later placed across City Creek, and it remained in use for years as a footbridge. It lay with the round side up, and after the bark peeled off, it became very slippery, especially when wet. After Presidents Young and Kimball moved onto their lots, the path leading to the footbridge connected their homes. One day, Aunt Priscinda Kimball's little daughter, Celestia, unknown to her mother, started to go to Aunt Zena's house. It was in the spring of the year 1850, and City Creek was swollen by the melting snows. The child eventually slipped off the slab and was drowned. As soon as the family missed her, a cry of alarm was given. I was confined to the house with a painful flesh wound on my leg. Hearing the ruckus and seeing the excited people running along the creek, I surmised what had happened. Running to the slab, I dropped into the water and was carried by the swift current to Brother Wells' lot, where the fence had caught flood wood and formed a dam and an eddy. I dove under the drift and, finding the body, brought it to the surface and gave it to Dr. Williams, but the precious life was gone. Soon after, we moved on to our city lot. A band of Indians camped near us. Early one morning, we were excited at hearing their shrill, blood-curdling war whoop mingled with the occasional sharp cries of pain. Father sent me to the fort for help. Charlie Decker and Barney Ward, the interpreter, and others hurried to the camp. It was Wanship's band. Some of his braves had just returned from the warpath in a fight with Little Wolf's band. They lost 2 men, but had succeeded in taking 2 girls prisoners. One of these they had killed and were torturing the other. To save her life, Charlie Decker bought her and took her to our house to be washed and clothed. She was the saddest looking piece of humanity I had ever seen. They had shingled her head with butcher knives and firebrands. All the fleshy parts of her body, legs, and arms had been hacked with knives, then with firebrands had been stuck into the wounds. She was gaunt with hunger and smeared from head to foot with blood and ashes. After being washed and clothed, she was given to President Young and became one of his family. They named her Sally, and her mind was filled by the courtship of Kanosh, a pioneer Indian love story, and written about by my gifted cousin, Susa Ye Gates. But Susa gave us only the courtship, while the ending of Sally's life, as told to me by a man named Kanosh, was as tragic as her childhood days had been thrilling. After she married Kanosh, several years of her life passed pleasantly in the white man's house which he built for her. Then her Indian husband took himself another wife who became jealous of Sally and perhaps hated her also for her white man's ways. One day, when they were in a secluded place digging, the new wife murdered Sally and buried the body in a gully. When Kanosh missed her, he took her track and followed it faithfully as a bloodhound could have done, and was not long in finding the grave. In his grief, he seized the murderess and would have burned her at the stake, but the white man interfered. In due time, the Indian woman confessed her guilt and, in harmony with Indian justice, offered to expedite her crime by starving herself to death. The offer was accepted, and on a lone hill in sight of the village, a wickiup was constructed of dry timber. Taking a jug of water, the woman walked silently toward the living grave. Like the rejected swan, alone, unloved, in low tones, she sang her own sad requiem until her voice was hushed in death. One night, when the evening beacon fire was not seen by the villagers, a runner was dispatched to fire the wickiup, and the retribution was complete. Sally's funeral had taken place only a day or two previous. Over 100 wagons followed the remains to their last resting place, and beautifully floral wreaths covered the casket, for Sally had been widely loved among the white settlers in her gentle ways. That is definitely a welcome to town kind of event in the Mad Wild West, isn't it? All right, let's take a look at another adventures of John. Now, a year or so after that, John decides that he's going to travel around and start checking out the West and making his way through life. Here we are picking him up on one of his travels, heading out west from Salt Lake. He says, "At the Vegas Springs, I met for the first time that renowned Indian peacemaker, Jacob Hamblin, and learned from him the history of the Mountain Meadow Massacre. He said the Indians were still hostile and thirsting for more blood. On the Muddy, a small stream on that region, we found living in a wagon bed turned bottom side up for a shield from heat and sand, Ira Hatch and Thales Haskell, strong men giving the better part of their lives to missionary work among the Indians, a labor that brought them neither pleasure nor wealth. Taking their advice, we rested a day, proposing to make rapid drives from there to the settlements. On the 13th of May, we nooned at the Beaver Dams, rested until night, and then drove to Clara Mountains, made a dry camp, kindling no fire. In the morning, we drove to Cane Springs for breakfast. Scarcely had we turned our horses when we were surrounded by 40 Indian warriors, their faces all blackened. I soon became convinced that they had been watching for us and intended to rob, if not kill us. Many of them had on good broad clothes, which I suppose they had taken from people they had murdered at Mountain Meadows. Most of them had good guns, and they were very insolent, helping themselves to whatever they wanted. A few minutes after they came, a mourning dove landed on a willow at the head of the spring, about 2 rods from our camp. The wind was blowing hard from the south, waving the willow on which the bird rested. The Indians commenced shooting at it. With a sudden impulse, I raised my rifle and fired. If I had the dove in my hand, I could not have cut off its head more neatly and nicely than I did. The Indians seemed astonished and for a short time were quiet. In our small company, only 5 of us, was a mountaineer by the name of Hardin. I felt that he was the only man that could be relied on in the case of trouble. He loaded a double-barrel shotgun with navy balls and stood leaning by the side of the carriage, the butt of his gun on the ground, the muzzle resting in his right hand. 3 Indians crawled under the carriage and commenced scuffling. Instantly, one of the barrels of his gun went off, taking the upper part of Hardin's ear, tearing away the rim of his hat. It knocked him down, and I thought he was killed. The chief threw the back of his hand to his mouth and gave the war whoop. I cocked my gun, put the muzzle against his belly. He stopped yelling, and Hayden sprang up and attempted to shoot him, but I interfered, telling the men that our lives depended on keeping the chief. I then spoke in Ute and ordered the Indians to their camp, but kept the chief prisoner. We hitched up and put the chief into the carriage, drove until 3 o'clock, and then rested until dark, when we hitched up and drove rapidly until midnight. We then camped, tied up, and stood guard without a fire till morning. After breakfast, we gave the Indian a shirt and plug of tobacco and told him to get. Years after, I became intimately acquainted with this Chief Jackson. He was a bad man, and while he lived, there was no peace with his band. Without doubt, all that saved our scalps at that time was the fortunate shot in killing the dove and the course we pursued in keeping the chief prisoner. The lesson there is that sometimes luck is better than skill in the Mad Wild West. And the final story from John's life, this is titled Squaw Fight. The coming of our people to Utah in 1847 brought us into contact with the most powerful Intermountain tribe of Utes. Up until then, these Indians had had their little association with the white man. Consequently, in their social life, they were following exclusively the customs and traditions of their Indian ancestors. Many of their practices were horrifying. The law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was born and bred in them. Hence, if a white man killed an Indian, the tribe took revenge by killing the first white man who chanced to fall into their hands, though he might have been perfectly innocent, having never harmed them. They also took great delight in torturing helpless victims. At our coming, the notorious Chief Walker was at the zenith of his power. Not only was he a scourge to the Spaniards in California, but he remained also a terror to the weaker bands of Indians inhabiting the Intermountain country, from whom he exacted a yearly tribute of children to sell into slavery to the Spaniards. It was Governor Brigham Young's prohibiting of this child slave traffic in the territory that led to the Walker War. Next in brutality to child slavery was what we termed squaw fights. They came about in this way. If a brave saw a maiden that he desired, he would go to her father, who according to their laws had a right to sell her and bargain for her, usually paying from 1 to 5 ponies for her. If it happened that the girl had a lover and he would put up as much purchase money as he had the first applicant, then the lovers would be settled by a fist fight. Sometimes conditions would be such that every warrior in the tribe would be allowed, nay, would be honor bound to take part in the melee and aid his tribesmen to win his wife. It would then be a national war and would be conducted on long established rules and ceremonies which the Indians hold in deep reverence. In 1861, at the frontier town of Santa Clara in southern Utah, I witnessed one of these tribal fights. A young, slender, delicate-looking girl, eventually the belle of the band, was purchased by a brave of Coal Creek, John's band. But a brave of the Santa Clara tribe was the girl's accepted lover. The aspirants were men of influence in their respective bands, though they were unequal in physical ability. The man from Cedar, whom I'll call Anqueteets, was a large, muscular, well-matured man of commanding personality, a warrior tried and proven, while Panaminto, the Clara man, was only stripling, a youth of fine features and an eagle eye, bespeaking pride and ambition, but 50 pounds lighter in weight and Wakeets. By the rules of the contest, the physical difference made it impossible for the lovers to settle it by single combat. Hence, it was arranged by tribal agreement that 20 warriors on each side should participate in the struggle. The ground selected was a flat just west of Old Clara Fort. A square was marked off, the creek being chosen for the south line. A line drawn in the sand marked the east, west, and north boundaries. East of the east line was Anataki's goal, which, if he could reach with the girl, she was his. Contra, west to the west line, was Panamino's goal, claiming same concessions. On opposite sides of a line running north and south through the center of this square were the braves, lined up, stripped to the skin, save the indispensable G-string. At the tap of the Indian drum, with bowed heads and arms wildly beating the air, the two files rushed like an angry bullocks upon each other. The air hitting was fierce and rapid for a few minutes until a second tap of the drum, when the warriors clinched and the mass became a seething, whirling cyclone of dark figures, cheered upon by the squaw and by an occasional war whoop from some interested onlooking warrior. To vanquish an opponent, you had to throw him and hold him flat on his back for the supposed time it would take to scalp an actual enemy. At the end of an hour's exciting struggle, a few warriors on each side had been vanquished, but the forces remaining were equal in number, so neither party had gained the advantage. They now changed the procedure. The father led the maiden to the central line. She looked terrified, and well she might be, for the ordeal through which she was to pass was a fearful one of the brutal pain that would test her powers of endurance to the utmost. The champions ran to the girl and seized her by the wrist, undertook to force her to their respective goals. Soon it became a tug of war, with 15 strapping warriors on each side. The flesh of the trembling maiden quivered under the strain of 30 brutal demons struggling and yelling to accomplish their aims. Gyrating from one side of the field to the other, they came in one of their wild swirls to the banks of the creek and fell into the water up to their necks. The girl, eventually in swoon, was entirely submerged, only her mass of glossy tresses floating on the surface of the water. Andrew Gibbons, one of the Indian missionaries, flung himself on the bank, and seizing the girl's hair, he raised her head above the water. Instantly, every brave broke his hold and scrambled to the bank, and Anwakeets angrily demanded that Gibbons should fight him for having interfered. To my surprise, Gibbons accepted the challenge, flung aside his hat, and stepped into the ring. Tutsi gave the signal, and Anwakeets sprang to the fray, only to measure his length backward in the sand. 3 times in succession, his stalwart body kissed the earth. Then, moving with more caution, the Indian dodged a blow and succeeded in grappling Gibbons. But again, white man's skill was superior to his strength. Anwakeets was flung to the ground and held until the imagined scalping was performed. Gibbon stepped back and folded his arms. His vanquished opponent arose, and with a majestic air that the white man could not imitate, he stepped to the maiden, spoke a few low words that seemed to have magical effect, and taking the unresisting hand, led her to the victor and presented her as a bridal trophy for the white man's valor and skill. Gibson, with a face glowing with satisfaction at the happy turn of the combat, accepted the maiden and leading her to Panamito, gave her to him, a mistake wherein the white man's sympathy for the weak overruled his judgment. The presentation was followed by a war whoop from Anatakis and his braves. Rushing to their camps, they returned with guns in hand and, forming a circle around the girl, ordered her to march. This fight gave me a deeper insight into the nobility and sterling character of our Indian missionary boys. What fearless men they were, ready for any emergency. At this crisis, it looked as if Anatakis would triumph by armed force, yet the whites felt that his case was not just. But an unexpected champion, a lion, stood in his path. This time, it was Thales Haskell, another Indian missionary who, of it was said, his cheeks never paled, his voice never trembled. He sprang in front of Anatakis and said, "I called you chief, but I see you are a boy, and a coward at that. Put up your gun and be a man." Then Tugovic's voice was heard commanding the father to lead the girl to the center of the field, and told the warriors that they might go on with the fight until the sun should hide its face behind the mountain. If neither party won by that time, the girl should be released from the father's vows. Each band of warriors withdrew themselves for a few minutes in consultation. Then, with firmness depicted on every countenance, they took their places, the champions grasping again the wrist of the trembling young squaw. A look of despair deepened the pallor of her face, as if the terror of death was resting upon her, and a death-like silence reigned as both sides waited the signal to begin the encounter. At this critical moment, the girl's young brother, who had stood aloof with folded arms and clouded brow during all the struggle, bounded to his sister's side, and drawing his knife from his sheath, he buried it in her bosom. She fell lifeless into her father's arms. The brother, holding the bloody knife on high, said, "I loved my sister too well to see her suffer more. You can call me a boy, but if there is a brave who thinks I have done wrong, let him take the knife and plunge it into my heart. So I will join my sister and lead her to the red man's happy hunting ground. I'm not afraid to die." Every warrior bowed his head and, turning, walked in silence to the camp. There it is, another exciting, crazy, mad Wild West story. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode and the crazy stories. And until the next episode, keep your horses tied up. Thanks for listening. The Mad Wild West Podcast. These are the true stories that made it wild.